Now, the University of Johannesburg yesterday held a dialogue in collaboration with Democracy Works, and the title, The Future of South Africa We Want. The thrust of the discussion was about honest reflections on South Africa, where the country comes from, what gains were made, and most importantly, what needs to change. Among the speakers was Rivonia Circle Director Tessa Dooms. She holds the view that South Africa gave power entirely to politicians and overwhelming power to the government, and that people who have power are those with access to politicians while disempowering the rest of society, leaving people disengaged and demobilised. For more on this, we're joined by Tessa Dooms, and it really is a pleasure to have her. She, of course, is an author and one of the directors at the Rivonia Circle. Tessa, always a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Leanne.
So, elections are gone. The executive, parliamentarians, they've been appointed. What's the importance of a conversation like this at this stage? I mean, does it mean that there is still something wrong with the country? Is anything changed that you've noticed in this very short amount of time? Or are you getting a sense that it's the same old, same old?
Well, I do think there's an importance in the election that we've just come through. And firstly, it's a reminder that elections do matter, that elections can shift the political terrain and can put politicians in different kinds of positions in terms of the way in which they access power, think about power, distribute power. So I think that that is an important, just mental thing. I was listening to young people the other day who said that because they've never actually seen at a national level, particularly where most people are assessing the state of South Africa, they'd never seen the ANC go below 50% at national level and had never imagined it was possible in their lifetime. It's brought back hope that the power of citizens through the vote still matters. Now, it's the way in which politicians now use that power and the way that we as citizens use this new configuration of power that I think is the real opportunity. And so yesterday in the UJ debate, I made a point about the 1994 moment, and we know that there's been many comparisons between 2024 and 1994 for obvious reasons. But one of the comparisons that I made was that in the era of the 94 transition, what really happened psychologically to the country is that we went from being a majority of people in this country feeling like we did not have a government, because we didn't. There wasn't a legitimate government for the majority of people. And so organizing ourselves in communities and that activist movement, the UDF and others, really was about citizens realizing and people realizing that they needed to govern themselves, and thus the impulse towards democracy. And democracy is about self-governance. But at that democratic transition, it was almost like we handed over all of that community-based power, that civic power, that citizen-based power, that power that lied in civil society. And we kind of wholesale handed it over to government and to politicians. Yeah. And I think that they need an opportunity to reclaim that power. So a government is not enough. That's the lesson of the last 30 years. You don't have a complete democracy just because you have representatives. You need participation as well, and an empowered citizenry, not only empowered politicians.
So, I mean, obviously the view, and I think you briefly mentioned it, that after 1994, there never really was a sit down and a discussion about how we, as South Africans, want to construct the South Africa we want. Is it too late now? Because now it looks like, once again, we're in the hands of politicians who decide what we as South Africans want. And then you always see that trend, what South Africans? You know, that's a big question that a lot of people ask and say, you know, who are you talking on behalf of? And is it just talking about a politician's interests of what they see, or is it the general public and what they are saying? Is it time to have these discussions, or is it perhaps too late?
No, it's certainly not too late. At the Rivonia Circle, we run a program called the Democracy Builder. And a core part of that program is an activity we call South Africa 2.0. And we hold this with communities at the most local levels of our society. But the chance and the opportunity to what we call upgrade South Africa exists. And when we are in conversation with communities of people and really give the opportunity for different people from different backgrounds in society that don't necessarily have access to power to say, okay, if I had to design the kind of South Africa I want, if I had to upgrade our South Africa in the ways that I want to, what would I do? And there's two important things we've learned from that activity. One is that once people have that understanding that co-governing South Africa is democracy, that all of us can actually and should actually have a role in envisioning the country, people get quite animated. They go from being very disillusioned to very animated. The second thing that we've learned is that there are so many opportunities for innovation in our system through participatory rather than simply representative democracy. I'll give you some examples of this in our work. One was that in Mlazi, we asked participants to rethink through what local government could look like. And they said to us, well, in their perfect South Africa, local government wouldn't exist because they don't want the buffer of very cumbersome bureaucracies and politicized bureaucracies. They would like communities to be able to come up with their own systems, their own budgets for their own projects, and take those to government. Now, one might say, well, that's outlandish, that would never work. But the point that it's making is that citizens are able to identify where the problems are, the stock gaps are in our democracy, and are willing to participate in things like budgeting, in planning, in envisioning the future, and coming up with projects in their environment. We've seen, because our platform asks people to do a 6-week project. We've been in 100 communities doing this. Over 60 of the projects, 6-week projects that people have come up with that start with things like farming, clinic committees, clinics, LGBTQI advocacy organizations. People have taken up those things, turned them into either long-term NGOs, long-term projects, or engaged governments on a long-term basis. And so what we need to do in this country is actually give people the space to participate meaningfully.
Yeah.
Right now, politicians have taken away the meaning of participation by politicizing it, and we need to depoliticize it radically.
And it is, I mean, what you're saying is we see it. It's a lived experience. I mean, this I know was raised yesterday during these discussions, and we talk 30 years later. There's a lack of transformation. There's a lack of opportunities for so many people. We have children that are dying in pit latrines. There is rampant drug abuse. There is too much spending right on the top and nothing that trickles down to the people that desperately need it. I know what you have said is that South Africa needs an upgrade. How do we upgrade? How do we tackle these issues?
Well, I'll point to two things that I think are important. The first is what I call devolution of power. What we absolutely need is more bottom-up governance and democracy in the country. And so politicians have come up with this idea of a national dialogue. And as much as I rolled my eyes at the idea of another national dialogue, because I know what political talk shops can look like, I do get excited at the idea of actually going street by street and community by community and going to listen and engage with different communities of people about solutioning for the country. And if that's what a national dialogue can look like, a process of 6 months to a year of really organizing each community in this country for the views that they hold, for the issues that they have, for the ideas they have for society, and the ways they would like to participate in that, I'm all for it. And I hope that politicians can be swayed towards that kind of thing. And then the second thing is that we all need to mobilize ourselves and organize ourselves for change in different ways. I remember during the counting of the results, the business community came out. I was quite surprised. While we were still counting the results, came out with a joint statement from business and society saying, this is what we would like to happen after this election. And a lot of us were up in arms about it. But the truth is you get what you organize for. Business sectors in this country are more organized than most of us are. And yes, they have the resources to do that, but the point is that organizing is what changes things. You get what you organize for. Political parties are organized. In civil society, we have become less and less organized. We have become disorganized, in fact. And at the level of community, we are not organizing ourselves and really saying, okay, how do we construct things that we want as joint projects for success, joint ways in which we don't just use mobilization to protest. We also use mobilization for participatory processes, for example. We use mobilization not only to vote, we use mobilization also to start collaborative projects in our communities. I think we need to reorganize and energize society. I worry that we're all waiting for somebody else to do something for us and on our behalf.
Yeah.
And I think that the power and devolving power to communities is one of the biggest steps forward, so that we don't wait just for government to fail or succeed. We become a government and co-governors of the society from wherever we are.
Perhaps in a way you've already answered this question, but I really do need just a bit more from you, and unfortunately in a very short time, because we've got to wrap very shortly. But there was a comment yesterday, and that's how I feel, and I think a lot of South Africans feel, where they said that elections give a sense of hope that things might change, but the reality, and we're seeing this reality, that's not the electorate that keeps things the same over the years. It's the politicians that are there. Yes, we voted, and there's a GNU, if you want to call it that, because a lot of people are even skeptical of calling it a GNU, because not everybody is represented there. I mean, we can see what's happened in Gauteng. We see at the national level. To call it a GNU, many say it's rather a grand coalition. But, you know, they make the decisions for us, and nothing really changes. Perhaps you want to just end off by elaborating slightly on some of the views that were raised about that.
Yeah, absolutely. A government for the government, by the government is not a democracy. The coalitions that we have now, no matter what we call them, are an opportunity for us to participate in the political realm as citizens, whether we are party aligned or not. The beauty of coalitions, and this is the world over, is that not all politicians are now just in a pact with each other that is unshakable. In fact, I was thinking about this in terms of parents. When you have parents in a home, many children have learned at a very young age how to play parents off against each other, how to, say, mom said this, but dad said this. And I say that very crudely, but it's an example of the fact that coalitions mean that politicians need to negotiate amongst each other more. And one of the powers of negotiation comes from public pressure. We need to pressure the government and government role players in the directions we want to go. If we are silent, they have no reason to go one way or the other except what benefits them. Without our voice, they can do whatever they want. But when we have, as different sectors of society, a voice, constituents, when we organize ourselves in numbers, politicians care about that, not only because of the PR and public relations, but because they also know now more than ever that by the next election, which is only 2 years away, we can punish them at the polls if they do not listen to us in between elections.
Indeed. Well, very powerful statements made, and it certainly has been very interesting to talk to you, and we thank you as always for your time, for joining us here on Morning Live. And that, of course, was author and director at the Rivonia Circle, Tessa Doom, sharing her perspectives, having participated in a dialogue hosted by the University of Johannesburg yesterday, and the title, The Future of the South Africa We Want. So very interesting, Tessa. Thank you very, very much for that. And people have been weighing in on this and talking about, many issues of what it is they want from South Africa and how it is that, they see this South Africa that's been voted in the new government that's been coming in. And, do we actually have a role and a say in all of this? Well, certainly in elections we spoke. But now we leave it up to the politicians to move it forward, and can they do that? So quite an interesting one, it really is.